It was a stormy Thanksgiving in 2019, and our family gatherings are always pretty small. It was just my mom, my two sisters, my grandparents, and me for dinner at my mom's house in a quiet town just outside of Nashville. My older sister, Emma, had moved out years ago, while my younger sister, Sarah, and I still lived with our mom. Our grandparents lived about 15 minutes away, and since our dad's side of the family lives in a different state, we were on our own for the holiday. We were all pitching in with the cooking, and Grandma was bringing a few of her famous sides. As usual, we set dinner for 6 p.m. sharp. Our grandparents showed up around 5:30, and we went outside to help them navigate the slippery, rain-slicked walkway to the front door. It was coming down hard that night. Once they were inside, we settled into the living room, and I spent time with Grandpa watching football. He's a die-hard Patriots fan. Meanwhile, Emma and Sarah were in the kitchen, helping Mom put the finishing touches on the meal. Dinner was coming together nicely, and it was shaping up to be a cozy evening, until it wasn't. When it was time to set the table, I headed into the kitchen to help. We were all seated by 6 p.m., and the table was overflowing with food. We had turkey, glazed ham, mashed potatoes, green beans, cranberry sauce, and more. I'm sure I'm forgetting something, but you get the idea. After we ate, we moved to the living room, and everyone got comfortable in front of the TV. But before the game could end, the doorbell rang. It was still pouring outside, and no one was expecting anyone else. Mom's first thought was that it might be Dad. Long story short, they don't speak, but the idea of him showing up unannounced wasn't completely impossible. She asked me to check. I opened the front door, calling out through the rain, "Who is it?" But the noise of the storm drowned out the voice from the other side, so I cracked open the door a bit, leaving the storm door still locked. Standing there in the downpour was a man, dressed in a huge raincoat with a hood pulled up. When I opened the door, he moved closer and shouted something through the glass. I had to ask him to repeat himself twice before I understood. He said he was hungry and asked for some food. Then he said, "The Lord will bless you for your kindness." I went back into the living room and told Mom. I didn't want to open the door, but Grandma, being the kind-hearted soul she is, insisted I give him something. So I grabbed a paper plate and loaded it up with some of the leftovers, hoping it would be enough to satisfy him. I went back to the door, and the man was still standing there waiting. When I held the plate out, he immediately tried opening the door. I yelled at him that it was locked, but he didn't stop. Something didn't sit right with me, and I hesitated. I should have slammed the door, but instead, I unlocked it. As soon as I pushed it open, he yanked it from my hands and tried forcing his way inside. I panicked and shoved him back, throwing the food and yelling for Sarah to help. By the time she got there, I saw 2 more men rushing up the walkway toward us. I was able to push the first guy out enough to slam the door shut, just in time for my sister to lock it behind me. I rushed to the back door to make sure it was secure. We didn't have time to lose. The storm was only making everything harder to see, but I kept looking out the windows, trying to spot anything that might help us. And then I saw them 2 men running toward the back of the house. They must have tried the back door and failed, because then they took off through the yard, heading toward the gate. And just like that, they disappeared into the night. When the police arrived, they found the plate of food still scattered on the front porch, left untouched. No one mentioned it, but I couldn't help but notice. It wasn't hard to tell that those men weren't after a meal. They were after something else. Our Thanksgiving was almost ruined, but thanks to quick thinking, we were safe. I know Grandma meant well, and I understand why she wanted to help, but sometimes the right thing can be the wrong thing. We installed a doorbell camera soon after, and I'll never forget that night. It was Thanksgiving of 2021, and I was at my parents' house for dinner, since they were hosting this year. I hadn't seen some of my cousins and uncles in almost a year, so it felt nice to catch up. We had the usual Thanksgiving gathering. My parents cooked a huge meal, of course. But before dinner, something happened that almost ruined the entire night. I got a long text message from an unknown number. I won't share the details, but it started with, "Hey Sarah, hope your Thanksgiving is going well," and just like that, I knew exactly who it was. The text came from Kevin, a guy who had been stalking me for months. Kevin was someone I'd never even met in person, but we matched on a dating app a while back. We exchanged texts and snapped for a bit, but I never felt a connection. He gave off these obsessive vibes from the start, so when I politely declined his offer for a date, telling him we didn't really have much in common, he flipped. He started acting aggressive, even threatening me when I posted a picture with a friend, thinking I was out on a date. That was when I blocked him on everything. Snapchat, Instagram, and his phone number. But blocking him didn't stop him. I kept getting random Instagram accounts, ones with 0 followers, trying to follow me. Same with Snapchat, different names every time, always with a 0 snap score. Every time I added them back out of curiosity, it was always the same. After reading the message, I was disgusted. It was a mix of gaslighting and borderline threats. I told him, if you keep contacting me, I'm going to the police. I didn't want to ruin my night, so I put my phone down and tried to focus on being present with my family. Grandma even gave me a side eye and told me to put it away, which made it easier to forget about the message for a while. But then, just 30 minutes later, another message from another random number. Another long, disturbing text. I didn't want to deal with it right then, so I shoved my phone back in my purse and did my best to focus on the conversation. After dinner, when things started winding down, I finally checked my phone. The new text was worse. It was longer, and it was just Kevin berating me, insulting me, and acting like a complete narcissistic sociopath. I showed my mom and some of the others, and they were appalled. My mom insisted I go to the police the next day and report him for harassment, which I was already planning on doing. After I left my parents' house, I headed back to my apartment. It's the lower floor of a 2-family house in a quiet neighborhood in New Orleans, where my friend Mia is my roommate. I got home before she did, and went straight to my room to look for a Christmas movie to unwind. That's when my phone rang. It said unknown caller. I knew it was him. I declined the call and silenced my phone. I put on some cheesy holiday rom-com, A Christmas for You, starring James Gandolfini, and settled in to try to sleep. But halfway through the movie, I heard footsteps coming from the hallway outside my room. I thought it was Mia coming home from her family's house, so I didn't think much of it at first. But then, the footsteps came straight to my door. Someone tried to open it. I always lock my bedroom door at night, even though I trust Mia. It's just a habit I've had for years. I paused the movie and listened, and I could hear the doorknob turning. A few seconds later, I yelled Mia, hoping it was her. The noise stopped. Then, I heard quiet footsteps walking away from the door. I grabbed my phone to call Mia, but when I checked the screen, I had more texts from a third random number. The worst one said, "Good thing you made it obvious where you live." I immediately called Mia, but she didn't pick up. I called my parents next, and my dad was the one who answered. I whispered into the phone, "Dad, I think Kevin is in the house." My dad was furious. He told me to stay put, that he was coming over right away. He only lived about 10 minutes away, but he was at my place in 5. He drove like a man possessed. During that time, I stayed on the phone with him. Then, just as I was about to lose my mind, Mia called me back. She told me she wasn't coming home that night. That was when I knew for sure it wasn't her. When my dad got there, the front door was locked. I let him in, and we started searching the place. My dad checked all the windows. When he got to the sliding door by the kitchen, the one big enough for someone to fit through, he lifted it open. He looked at me with a mix of anger and disappointment and said, "You didn't lock this." That's when it hit me. Kevin had gotten in through the unlocked window. I had always thought I was safe, but I'd failed to lock up properly. That night, I went back home with him to sleep at my parents' house. The next morning, my dad took me to the courthouse to get a temporary restraining order. We walked through the legal process, and eventually I had to go to court to extend the order. The judge granted the extension, and although I could never prove Kevin had broken into my apartment, the texts alone were enough evidence. If he contacted me again through any platform, he'd be arrested on the spot. Kevin was dangerous, and I don't know if he's found anyone else to harass since then, but I hope not. That night changed everything. It was Thanksgiving, and my family had gathered at my Uncle Jake's house, located on a secluded lake in northern Alabama. The house wasn't anything extravagant, more rustic than fancy, but it was private and spacious, surrounded by nothing but woods and a few other houses scattered around the water's edge. Uncle Jake is the kind of guy who goes all out for the holidays. He's the life of the party, always up for a good time. So this year's Thanksgiving felt more like a backyard bash than the usual dinner. We showed up around 3 in the afternoon, and before long the music was blasting, beers were flowing, and we were all laughing, playing card games and cornhole, even shot some hoops. Though that didn't last long with all the food and drink we had consumed. By the time it started getting dark, Around 5:30, Aunt Linda and Uncle Jake brought out the food plates stacked high with turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, and all the works. They set up a large table under the gazebo by the lake. The gazebo had these string lights, so when the sun dipped, the whole place had this warm glow about it. Everyone was enjoying the evening, just like we always did. But things took a weird turn when my cousin Brian pointed out toward the woods. "Dad, who's that?" he asked, his voice trembling a bit. We all turned to look, and standing at the edge of the trees just outside the yard was a figure. A man, standing still like a statue, just watching us. Uncle Jake, not one to back down from anything, got up and marched toward the guy, shouting, "Hey, what do you want?" He probably hadn't noticed how drunk he was by then. But before he even reached the edge of the woods, the man turned around and bolted into the trees. Uncle Jake laughed it off and came back to the table, saying, "Must be one of those local oddballs." Aunt Linda didn't find it funny, though, and I could feel the unease settle over the group. The whole vibe shifted. Just when we thought it was over, I saw him again. The same man standing further down by the lake now. This time, Uncle Jake didn't hesitate. He stood up and walked toward the guy again, yelling insults at him. But before he could get close, I noticed another figure, this one on the far side of the yard, standing in the shadows of the trees. When the first man bolted into the woods, the second one stayed put, almost like they were working together. I wasn't laughing anymore. I told my cousin and my dad about the second person, and we all got up, ready to confront whoever these guys were. But just as we started walking toward the woods, the second man took off too, disappearing into the night. At that point, we all agreed it was time to call it a night. We cleaned up the table and moved everything inside. Uncle Jake left the lights on outside, but it was clear no one was feeling very comfortable. We tried to shake it off, assuming it was just some drunk teenagers or local troublemakers messing around. Still, something felt off. Later, when I went outside to grab another beer from the cooler, I suddenly got the feeling that I wasn't alone. The gazebo light was off now, and everything felt too quiet. I grabbed the beers quickly, trying to get back inside as fast as I could. But just as I turned to walk back, I heard the unmistakable sound of a chair scraping across the concrete. I spun around, and there, standing under the gazebo, was a man tall, easily 6'A". I froze. My heart skipped a beat as I yelled for Uncle Jake, running back toward the house. Just as my uncle and dad came outside, there was a loud bang from the opposite side of the house, like someone was pounding on the siding. We all rushed inside, locking the doors. Aunt Linda went around the house, closing all the curtains and blinds. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Uncle Jake, who was always the last to involve the police, actually called 911. I couldn't believe it. After what felt like hours, there was a loud crash. The kitchen window had shattered. A brick had been thrown through it, with a note attached to it that simply said, "Leave now." It was creepy, like something out of a horror movie. The most unsettling part, Uncle Jake's Trump flag, which had been proudly hanging on the porch, was gone the next morning. Some people thought it was political retaliation, but honestly, we'll never know for sure. The whole thing was just too strange. I can't shake the feeling that we were being targeted. It was as if we were the prey, and those men were hunting us. Whatever their reason was, I don't think it was just about messing around. And now, every Thanksgiving, I can't help but think back to that night. It's a memory that haunts me, something I can't fully explain. But I know one thing for sure, there are some really messed up people out there.